Next, from Elmhurst College, a panel of business leaders discuss policies at the state and federal level and the impact those are having on the ability of businesses to create jobs. Among those participating in the panel is Doug Oberhelman, the CEO of Caterpillar, which is headquartered in Peoria and is among the nation's leading exporters. This program comes to us courtesy of Addison Community Television. It runs about 90 minutes.
I saw it in Argentina when I lived down there in 1981 and watched Argentina go bankrupt. And most of the third world countries went through this in the 80s. Today, the third world countries are relatively strong with their balance sheets. It's taken that long to work that around. So there is no silver bullet, but there are a few things I think that could help. And everybody complains about the rancor and the partisanship in Washington. I don't think that's going to go away. I think that is an indication of our society, of our country, and to some extent the world. The political systems in Europe we've watched fail Europe. We've watched a political system in Japan now. The 20 years I've been there, they've had 14 prime ministers or something. So a lot of things are happening in terms of the day-by-day withering of some of the things that we all grew up with we thought were sacrosanct. But some of it is that I think we've got so many good things going in the country. A couple key things would help, and you've touched on a number of them. And I believe the only true advantage a company has, a country has, a family has, is education. And that is one that we have got to get our hands around. It won't affect unemployment this year, but it can start to help pretty quickly. One of those is immigration and the visas, where I agree vehemently with the president. Let's open our borders to people that have talents that we can need here. We educate them at Purdue University, at Elmhurst College, at Millikan, and we require them to go home when their education is over. Smart people, good people. And I have had the experience at Caterpillar where we do that. We've given them internships at Caterpillar, and 5 years later they're across the table from us with our competitor. And we have just got to turn that around quickly. So education is one that comes right off the top. The fiscal situation could help us immediately. And I've said in the last few weeks, but certainly last week, that if we could get some degree of bipartisan movement in March, April, and May, as you talked about coming up this summer, the U.S. economy is solid enough underneath it to provide some growth. And growth is what we need desperately for tax revenues, for the unemployment rate, and jobs. And I drew the parallel in our conference call the other day, the last 3 years. We put out this outlook for 2013 on Monday, and CNB said, well, it's wide enough to drive a truck through. Yes, it is, because in 2011, this economy in the United States started out, we thought, you know, things are going to get better. What happened mid-year of 2011? The debt ceiling, the downgrade of the country, we sputtered out the year. 2012, a year ago right now, 2012 looks pretty good. What happened mid-year? An uncertain election, a bruising election. That uncertainty is now gone, but also horrible, horrible partisan fights over the fiscal cliff, which scared all of us into retracting our spending. We sputtered out the end of 12. So here we sit in the beginning of 13, and how am I going to call this one? We've got March coming up, April, May, you talked about it. I got a feeling the kids in Washington are going to do a lot of the same thing they've done the last 3 years. Now, fortunately for us, we're all learning how to deal with this. But my point is, imagine how good it might be if we could just get a little help out of that. And it's a long answer, John, I'm sorry, but the other thing that I really feel important, right now the world is starved for leadership. We've not had strong leadership in the world because of the economic situation primarily in a while. We're about to be energy independent with a little help from Washington on the rancor, with lots of other things going on right now with the level of our dollar, certainly with Europe on its back, Japan on its back, some Latin America doing pretty well. We could step up and really serve the world in a lot of areas if we can get it done. So we're poised to do this. And I wish I had the silver bullet to the question. There is none, but it's several things that have to happen as we go forward. And I come back to the education platform, which is a great theme for your conference. A family, a company, a country's only competitive advantage is the smart people within the entity, and that comes back to education. The one-room schoolhouse, my favorite saying, my dad always talks about it, the one-room schoolhouse put the man on the moon. Think about that. That generation was educated, for the most part, in a one-room schoolhouse, and they went to the moon.
I'll stop there, Governor. No, that's very good. That's very, it is kind of an open-ended question, but you obviously are in an industry where ad revenues reflect economic activity and confidence. So what would you tackle?
Well, I think the first thing that I see is, I think as Americans, we are very selfish. We are in a mature democracy, and what does that mean? I mean, we don't all, if we did a section of this room, we probably couldn't all come together with what we think is just kind of the top thing that we should be working towards. And so what has happened is we've splintered ourselves into a tremendous number of interest groups. And so it's very hard for our leaders, our quote-unquote leaders in Washington, to really agree on anything. And so one of the things that I would say, and you know, I look around and I say, when do Americans all come together, regardless of what we look like, who we are, where we're from, what party we stand for? It's only two things, and that's really sad. Those two things are, you know, terrorism. We all get our flags in. We can all agree no one's fighting. We're all holding hands. Or the Olympics. We're all, you know, got the American flag going. And what would it take for us to bring out our American flags and pull together and say, you know, these are the things that we all need to do as a unit to move this country forward? And that's I mean, I don't know what it would take, what kind of leader it would take. We've got to look at the long term, and that's what I talk about selfishness. We got to say, you know, not that my issues are not important, of course they are, but somehow this country has to come together, and we've got to put some of our individual issues aside for a moment and say, what is the best benefit for this country, for the livelihood of this country, for my children, for the next generation's children? And that's what we had once, because we were more of an immature democracy. We hadn't, you know, we didn't have the large middle class that we have now that's now being eaten away. You know, we were all striving for democracy. We were all striving for the same things. And so somehow, state by state, we need to be pulling together and saying, you know what, we're not going to put up with the kind of leadership that you are demonstrating on behalf of the people that you represent. We can't let them continue to get away with this. And it sounds impossible or whatever, but they will listen to their constituents. And somehow, we got to get past that, because the fighting, that's not helping anything. I think we can clearly see that with some of the stats that we have now. We're never going to get ahead if we don't somehow come up with, you know, what is that list of items that we need to move forward on. We hear the president now talking about a number of things that are going to be, you know, part of this second term. Most of those focus domestically, you know, whether it's gun control or gay rights, you know, immigration. Not to say that those things aren't important, but we got to make certain that the country continues to be strong in terms of the economy, and that we really work on those things that, you know, are important. You look at Finland. Finland has done a tremendous job in education. You know, they don't have standardized tests. Their teachers, you know, all have master's degrees. You know, and they are the highest scorers on standard tests. And one of the things there is the beauty and the joy of learning, versus I just got to get through this math and English and score this much on this test and I can move to the next level. We've got to reinstill in children that learning is a lifelong journey, that it's not just about passing one test, you know, memorizing and getting to the next level. That's not excellence. That's not equality. And so I think there's some lessons to be learned outside of this country in terms of how we can really transform what we have right now, the systems that we have in place, public, private, charter, and instilling back in young children and people that are in school today that, you know, again, learning is a lifetime lesson.
Tom?
Well, Doug and Desiree captured a lot of what I would want to say, but let me give from a slightly different angle of view. But start by, I am a trustee of the college, and let me first, on behalf of the board of the college, thank everybody for coming and sponsoring the event. We're really, really pleased to have an event like this. The leadership that Alan Ray has provided as president to raise the profile of our institution has been outstanding, and I think today's forum is just another example of how Elmhurst College is providing an important value to the community. If I would, I'd advise you to always look at the website, because the kinds of events and the kinds of conversations we have at a number of college events are very similar to today's, although this is clearly the cornerstone of our public events. But they're really great, and we've had fabulous leadership in developing it. So thank you on behalf of the college for supporting it. With that, as the CEO of one of the largest stock exchanges in the world, my job is to make sure that, that companies that need capital for growth find investors that want to invest in it in public markets. That is essentially what we do. So I spend a great deal of my time out looking, talking to both existing issuers and potential new issuers to go onto our markets as listed companies. We have 4,000 listed companies with approximately $2.2 trillion in market cap. As I've spent time over the last 18 months, I'd say, talking to investors, what I've found is that there are outstanding business plans and outstanding opportunities out there that companies see for their future. We have the pipeline of people that are wanting to raise additional capital who are already listed, and those that want to go on the public markets is actually outstanding. I'd say that pipeline is really good. Equally, there is a ton of money on the sidelines looking at the world and saying we're looking for investment opportunities. I think, Doug, you'd probably agree corporate balance sheets are very strong right now. And there's a lot of cash within corporations wanting to do things too. The thing that's bothering them is uncertainty. I've been an adult, I guess I can call it, when you get out of school, for probably 33 years now. And in my career, I've never seen the degree of uncertainty that exists in the C-suites of companies and in investors' minds than I've ever seen before. So what would I want? I agree with Doug, there's no silver bullet. Well, let's get some people to work on doing some things. It's interesting. As I watched the election, and you get a benefit by living in different countries. We lived in Asia. Our family lived in Asia for a while. We've now lived in Canada for a while. And it's really interesting to watch the governance process when you live in different countries. And what I saw what I observed in this election was a disproportionate amount of the rhetoric had to do with how we were going to divide the pie rather than how can we make the pie bigger. And there's a mindset that needs to be reset in my view, and it's what can we do to grow the economy, because there was a disproportionate talk in my view about how to divide the pie. And you don't see that rhetoric as prevalent in other economies during their election process. And I think it's an interesting issue.
Tom, you're because of your Canadian perspective, I'm curious that the Harper government, of course, has made a pretty aggressive move toward attracting business and stimulating growth, and they've got a corporate tax rate now that's down to 15%. Right. They've actually had a pretty aggressive immigration policy when Hong Kong was being turned back to mainland China. A lot of Hong Kong Chinese came to Vancouver. There was a direct effort to make that happen. They have a permanent and pretty robust R&D credit. And I realize that the Canadian system, the parliamentary system, I mean, somebody's in charge and somebody's wanting to be in charge, Right. So it's, but at least if you're in charge, you have to act, and if you lose confidence, you're on. But are you seeing just a difference in attitude with the on the Canadian side versus here? How do you capture? I mean, we're a lot bigger economy, obviously, but
Yeah, usually in comparing the two countries, I just multiply by 10, and that usually works, whether it's the population, whether it's the GDP. You know, if you just think of anything except for the price of groceries and multiply it by 10, it works out pretty well. But in terms of, you know, how to size things. But there is a difference. Canada is a country that's obviously blessed with enormous natural resources. You know, probably people don't realize it, but we get here in the United States 85% of our natural gas from Canada. We get twice as much oil from Canada than we do Saudi Arabia. Probably something most people wouldn't know if you stopped them on the street. I hope we're going to get into the Keystone Pipeline because I've got some thoughts on that, as you might guess. But to respond directly to your question, Canada has had the benefit of a balanced budget right up until the 2008 recession hit, and they've been deficit for a period here. There's a planned return to a surplus probably in the next 3 years. So, you know, it's got a lot of tailwind in terms of its economy. But it certainly needs a strong partner to the South. But a lot of that is the R&D credit that's available, a corporate tax rate that makes sense and is competitive globally is an important thing. You know, when you look at corporate tax rates in the United States, they are very high. I mean, they're exceptionally high, and then you add the state tax on top of that, they're very high. That's a competitive disadvantage for the United States to virtually every other country that's growing at a faster rate, and it's something that we have to address.
I think it's something that isn't, even when he came to the Business Roundtable meeting in December, renewed his support for lowering the corporate tax rate, and also I think fixing, we have this odd situation where money that Doug earns in other countries, if he takes it anywhere else in the world, he's done, once he's paid the local tax on it, he's done paying taxes. But if Doug wants to bring it back home, Caterpillar wants to bring that money back to the United States of America, then you got to pay the difference between, say, that 15% rate in Canada and our 35% rate. So
it's hard right now, on one hand, in the domestic argument to talk about big corporations, rich corporations making all this money, and we've all seen those arguments. But on the other hand, we have to be competitive, and Tom's making the point that, and I use this again in my working life. When I started at Caterpillar, I did tax analysis on finance investments around the world. It was real simple. It's 35% federal, 3% statutory for states. You had 38%. We were half the rest of our competitors. Germany at that time was 70, Britain was 80, on and on and on. It was easy to do, and we won every time. Today, we're at 35 and going up. States are no longer at 3 and going up. And all of our competitors, China, even most countries in Europe now, Canada, even Brazil, are half our rate. And it just makes it more difficult to compete from a U.S. base. And that's really one of the problems we have. And nobody wants to hear about or talk about giving big companies and rich people a break. And I understand that. But the fact is, if we're expected to make manufacturing jobs or create wealth in this country, we've got to be competitive with those outside this country who are getting it done. And today, in our case, we've never had a wider array of competitors. We had probably 5 when I came to CAT in '75. Today we have easily 150 around the world. And they all make construction equipment. They all want to sell in this market. They all want to sell in China where it's hot. And they want to take our jobs away.
Sure.
And the tax rate is certainly one of them, and reform will help that, and we're all for some reform around that. But it's a hard argument right now with a deficit that really is unsustainable and debt growing in an unsustainable rate. So it's a balance. It's, again, kind of a national priority, like Desiree said. What do we all want to do with this? And we couldn't get 5 people to agree in this room, and it's hard for our legislators. And I've talked to them, because I went and I beat them up because I want the R&D tax rate. And Desiree goes in the next minute in the hallway, and she wants something different. Tom goes in, and John goes in, and we're all this way. We've all got our hand out. Well, and that's given us this problem that we're at.
I think that's right. Desiree made a good point about the different the sort of the complexity of the array of interests that are out there competing to be heard. But I do think you also kind of made the point about growth and the importance, and all of our panelists have done that. One thing I've tried to explain is that I think we sort of most people in Washington get the idea that the states compete against one another. And I mean, Illinois is going through a tough competitive time right now. California is certainly facing some of that. And then we'll use Indiana under Mitch Daniels. They made some changes over there. They've gotten a lot more attractive. And Doug has spoken out here in Illinois about the state's competitiveness. It's something that it's really important. But today, what's not so understood is that nations are competing. It's sort of my reference to the Foreign Secretary of Great Britain at having coffee on Monday. I mean, they're just flat out. He said, you know, we're retooling our foreign service. We're actually opening consulates and embassies in the world today. And he said, we used to have 40 tasks that we'd tell them. Now we have 3. But one of those 3 is promoting Great Britain industry and business. And he said, we don't want any of our secretaries traveling anywhere in the world without being aware of what business deals are out there and how they might help. And that's a transformation that's quite, I think it's different in Britain, but it's a mindset that I don't think we have yet. And I think, I'm curious because you've been in the administration, well, actually of all of us, you're one who has been in an administration, but how do you get that? It's hard to change the mentality. We don't have people getting up every day saying, my goal is how many jobs can we create today? You know, that's, you know, I got my swim lane, I'm going to stay there, and I'm not the jobs as somebody else. But how do we?
Well, you know, I don't know that I know exactly what the answer is. I think that one of the huge things that is so important is communication. And there's so many politics and so many voices out there. You know, if there was some way that we could just simply, you know, paint the equation of why this is important to everybody. I think we still have to keep going back to that individual, because that's how you get people excited, that's how you get movement, that's how you get turns. We're at a point in our history where, you know, America may not necessarily be the best of the best of the best in everything. That's a hard thing for us to swallow. I mean, I'm American. I want us to be the best and the best and the best of everything. And we can keep putting our heads in the sand thinking, you know, this is the best country on earth and everything, but we got some issues here. I mean, when you look at some of the stats, we got some work to do. You know, we got a million school children that are homeless. We've got the 4 major banks, you know, $40 trillion tied up with derivatives. We've got, you know, $1 trillion worth of student loans for young people. You know, there's, you know, I think 46% of Americans don't think they have a good job. You know, again, those are individual things. How do we get a message across that somehow, you know, we got to pull together and begin to work on some of these things on a more, I don't know, unified level, you know? And I don't know what those answers are, because the division, and even the division even within the administration, you know, we're so specialized, but yet all these things are interrelated. You know, and so I don't know how you make a decision that, you know, other than at the very top, this is all we're going to work on. I mean, we had that with healthcare, and then that was a whole, you know, thing. You know, can we have that kind of push for the economy, for job creation? You know, intertwined with education, and we can only do a few things well. I mean, that's for sure. I don't think that we can, you know, we're very, you know, I keep going back to the same thing, you know, gun control now, immigration, this, you know, all of these things. So everybody's going to run in all those directions to try to get those things done.
You're making an important distinction, and maybe there's something we ought to comment on, just because there's sort of this cultural social agenda out there that tends to get all the headlines and that.
Correct.
But no matter what those issues are, they're actually easier, many of them, to resolve in a rising economy where that rising tide's lifting all the boats versus going the other direction.
I have a more cynical view than that. Those issues are a great distraction from the really tough stuff that nobody wants to touch.
No, I agree with you.
It's easy to do that.
Let's focus on this, but we can't keep punting. we continue to punt. We continue to
That's
delay,
right.
we continue to put it off, short-term fix. We've got to admit our own issues. And so somehow, you know, all across America, we should know what the real issues are. Maybe there's just 5 that will resonate with people to get them to say, okay, I'm going to start working on this now. I'm going to be focused on, you know, these things that get America back to where we should be. And we don't have that right now. We've got all these splintered and fractured entities, and, you know, we've got the media out there, you know, pushing us in this direction and that direction, and oh, yippee, hooray, we got that done. But really, what's really getting done?
Well, I think you make a good case, but then the remedy would seem to be, Doug, or you start making decisions. I mean, you can't let them stack up in the corner of the office unmade. You got to make them and move on. And Keystone Pipeline, Tom mentioned that. That's a good example. There's a few thousands of jobs that happen pretty quickly there, and you just keep on. I mean, success sort of begets success, and indecision begets more indecision. I'm afraid.
The thing that's interesting in Washington, and even in Springfield for that matter, but it's the same, that you talk to our legislators one-on-one, and everybody understands the gravity of the situation and what needs to be done. And 2 or 3 get together, it comes apart like all of us in this room, because you can't get a consensus. Well, the way we do it in private business, and I'm so glad I'm in private business and not politics. But
Me too.
The way we do it is we would sit down, which we did, and we say, what are the strategic things we have to get done in the next X period of time, and fast, and do it. And then we pick 3 to 5, whatever it is, and then we communicate the heck out of what we need to get done and how we're going to do it. And then in our case, we line up 150,000 people, and it takes a long time to get the message out, and even longer to get it going. We don't have that luxury in government because of the way in which the democracy works. But at the same time, there's some of those principles that ought to apply, and it's leadership and really what do we need to get done, and who wants to push that. And we just haven't had that, it seems like, for a long time. And the pressures of the press, the pressures of the debt, all intensely focus on not getting it done. And then we see these side issues come up that everybody wants to run to, because it gets me off the subject. I don't have to deal with it today.
And John, just go back to your question right before this one. We spend an incredible amount of time in Washington as well, because as you indicated when you introduced me, we own a U.S. option exchange here, and our exchanges are registered here. My view of Washington, one thing I don't think they've internalized yet, the Washington establishment, if you will, is how fluid capital actually is, and how smart the investors actually are. When I got out of school, the big investors in the world, the big institutional investors of the world were, maybe the GM pension plan, PIMCO. There were entities like that, and they were, for the most part, Americans, and for the most part, institutional money was invested within your country. That's gone. The people that own our stock, it's part Canadian, but it's not all Canadian. I'm sure some of your biggest shareholders are not in Illinois, not in the United States. Capital's fluid, and the people that are investing that capital are really smart, and they're assigning a certain amount of risk to the fact that our government seems to only work around a crisis. And even when it's trying to fix the crisis, it deals with the fringe issues around the crisis. The fiscal cliff issue, from my view, they dealt with a sideshow in it, and I know it was an important populist issue with respect to dealing with the tax rates. But the real issues, which were embedded in Simpson-Bowles, were let's deal with the spending side, and let's take $4 trillion out of spending, and we couldn't get that through a committee in Congress. Now, you might argue there's things in there that are good or bad, and that's worth the debate. But in Washington, we seem to deal with things in a crisis mode, and then it's on the fringe. So what would I do? I think that was your question?
Yep.
You know what I'd like to do? I, like Doug, I'm really glad I'm not in government. And I assume you're kind of glad you're not there anymore either. But let me say what I would do. And I'm going to volunteer these two, but
Sure.
I think if I were the president, I would appoint a Simpson-Bowles II or something like that. Only rather than have it led by elected legislators and then had some corporate people involved, I'm not criticizing Simpson-Bowles, but that's how I saw the structure. I'd actually have it led by people like these guys and some corporate leaders, and have some congressional leaders as a minority participant in that group.
Desiree, ready to serve?
I am ready to serve. I think the first thing is they're never going to admit that they can't do something. You know, that'll be the first.
But wouldn't it be wonderful if they did?
It would be wonderful, but I mean, when I think, and this is my analogy of what, you know, I think Washington is, and we've got the Super Bowl coming up, and so I think Washington is the Super Bowl. So it's the Super Bowl every day. That's what the game that we're playing. There are no timeouts. There's no time for no potty breaks, none of that. The audience is the media, and the key thing, and that I started to understand when I was there, the key thing is the two teams are the R's and the D's. You can't forget that. You're either on the R team or you're on the D team. Here's the real tricky part. There's some D's on the R team, and there's some R's on the D team. And so that's the game that you're playing 24/7. And it's a game. And it is, I mean, I was shocked to find, what do you mean there's some R's on the D team? You mean there's spies that are creating more conflict and problems? That's what I'm telling you. Under a microscope 24/7. So it's everyone's worst behavior.
Doug, what do you think?
Well, we've seen...
Outsource it?
Yeah, we've seen, yeah, definitely. Outsource a lot. But we've seen Simpson-Bowles, we've seen the Gang of Six, we've seen, time after time after time, very solid thinking, but, and I think generally headed in the right direction, but that's a long way from legislation. And it comes off track when you have to put it into detailed legislation. And I think we've seen at BRT and NAM, we've been involved with enough of these, and we've had hours, and we all have had days and days of input into the administration, into the R side, the D side, the House side, the Senate side. We're tired of talking. We've got lists of smart people's recommendations, and it goes away. And I'm afraid it's going to take a real crisis maybe to make something move. And we're just going to kick the can. And that's the worst thing that could happen. But again, I don't know, my wife and I went to see Lincoln. Everybody said, you got to go see Lincoln. So we went to see Lincoln. And one of my takeaways in that movie was the corruptness of government in 1862. And I thought it was just in 2013.
But he got it done. The ending is pretty good.
They got it done, and because they had to move. And it was vividly in front of you. Of course, we've all seen government through crisis and through corruption and everything else over the years, but that was really one of the interesting takeaways, but they got it solved. And look what came out of that corrupt system. This is a dynamic process we have. Nobody else in the world has it. And at some point, it's going to turn. It always has. But boy, in the meantime, we've got this huge mountain of debt on our shoulders. The creditors aren't going to forgive us, and that's likely going to be the crisis at some point down the road. It's a ways away a bit, but it's coming.
It is interesting. I around the time of the inauguration, I went to this dinner, and one of the speakers was the historian Doug Brinkley, and he asked the question, do we know who kept the Declaration of Independence during the Revolutionary War? Where was it? How did this survive? And what about the rest of the notes from that early Constitutional Convention, and where'd they go? Well, he goes on to tell the story of sort of one of the obscure guys who was sort of the secretary, but he was pretty important because he actually did all the arranging for the meetings in Philadelphia. He did keep the notes, but what happens to the notes is later on after the new nations formed, and he was the guy that went to tell Washington he'd been selected, would have to travel to New York to become the first president. But this guy tells the story that the notes and the debates were so vitriolic and the intensity so great that he didn't think they could survive, you know, that he burned them all because he didn't want that record left around of how antagonistic people were to each other, how they treated each other. And so Brinkley's point was, he said, well, you know, it's tough today, but, you know, we've sort of been there before. I think what's different today is that if they were having a fight in Philadelphia, by the time somebody wrote that down and took it by horseback, however many days they took it to get, it wasn't like you put in, you know, you're online. It could be online in a few moments. And I think the Desiree made a point about sort of these teams are playing and the media is the audience. I do think there is a problem that way. But when we think about jobs, if we could get the evaluation back to what are people doing, if we could somehow get there, that's where I think we need to go. If that becomes a priority, because all of a sudden people who are kind of sleepwalking through education now realize, wait a minute, these are the kind of jobs that are there, but I can't do these if I'm not skilled. I mean, we've got to awaken part of the population to education.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me, and again, as I've looked back in events, and I'm a kind of a child of the Vietnam War era, which was raging when I was in high school and in college, among other things, 9/11. Whenever we've, and you alluded to it, whenever we've been in a crisis, leadership or something has allowed us to rise above it and think about solving the problem. And I'm waiting for that catalyst, and we've been waiting for that catalyst. The last one was certainly 9/11, 12 years ago. But something will happen, and we will get that done. And the most unlikely leaders will become leaders, and we'll figure this out. But we haven't had that catalyst, and maybe the catalyst is some kind of debt thing. Maybe it's some kind of social thing. Maybe it's some kind of environmental, externally political event. I don't know. But I'm just kind of on the edge of my seat because it's happened so many times in our country to allow that to happen. But that's about our last hope, and that's only a hope because there's no process to get us there, clearly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to go back to the Lincoln movie because I think that was really powerful to me. We went to it too. And what I admired about the leadership that I saw was he was going to get that thing to a vote. Yes or no? Everybody around him at different points in time said, you know, hold off, wait a while, there's a better time coming, you know, try to talk to the Confederation guys. But he was determined to show the leadership to get this thing to a vote. Did some messy things to get the vote, obviously, but he was single-mindedly determined to provide the leadership to get a vote. Wasn't going to get stuck in some committee, wasn't going to get stuck inside some side office in Congress. He was going to get it to a vote. That's what we need. We need things to get to an on-the-record vote in the full body. And I think the process has become so muddied since the forefathers drew it up that it's almost, in some ways, bogging us down. It's like there's a ball and chain associated with the process.
A couple of things have happened. Maybe they're little signs of there was a bipartisan agreement in the Senate to kind of change the filibuster rules a little bit to make some things a little easier to proceed. Didn't throw the filibuster rule out, but it's a little easier. There was also, I think, because of the decision by Speaker Boehner to push the debt ceiling debate off until the summer, really May, end of May, then Senator Murray, who was the chair of the Budget Committee, said, okay, the Senate will do a budget, which they haven't done in 3 years. So you're getting back to a little bit, Tom, your point, kind of a regular order. Because the process is pretty ingenious. Lee Daniels spent a long time as a leader in the Illinois legislature. I had a long career in the legislative body before I became governor, and there is a mechanism. And I think one thing the Republicans had to understand in Washington after the election, they're not in charge. They're in charge of the House, but they're a minority in the government, and therefore they aren't they can't run things, and they can't run half of things. And I think to tell some of their new members, and I think Boehner's caucus in the House, almost half of it has been there less than 2.5 years. I mean, they came in this time or the time before, but the mindset was we're in control. Well, we're not. And so you can impact things, and you can be a shadow government and say, if we were in control, this is what we do. But you go back to a regular order, there's a mechanism for the House and Senate to iron out a difference. But if you're trying to negotiate everything before you ever bring it to a vote, it's really hard. And you necessarily end up then taking most of the members out of that process. And I think that's something they've done over the years, is they've destroyed the ability of an average member to contribute very much, because they were all doing it, 5 people trying to do it in some back room. So I'm hopeful that that's a better, they're still going to fight, but at least there's a mechanism. If they follow the mechanisms, Senate passes something, the House passes something, they work out the differences, and the executive can chime in. One thing, we were really at the point where I need to open this up to the audience. I'm sure there's a few questions out there. I think you've done a nice job of kind of kicking these around, but I want to come back to the theme that we've talked about, everybody's mentioned it. It's just public education in America, because I look at public education and to some extent public health. I mean, the health system and the education system are really funded problems. I mean, we're spending far more in this country than anybody else in the world on both of these. $650 billion a year on public education in America today. And Desiree, you mentioned, I mean, the Finland results. I mean, we kind of start out reasonably okay, but we still have, if you look at the national NAEP test, third graders, we've only got slightly more than a third that are actually proficient in reading. And so I sort of have a theory, if we can't teach young kids all to read, which the data is pretty clear, we can teach kids to read. We know how to do that. So that's a problem of will. But if we start out not being able to teach somebody to read, we're already on the slippery slope. But $650 billion a year. I've seen what Mayor Emanuel's gone through here in Chicago. Other mayors have faced. Mayor Bloomberg went through some of this out in New York. Washington, they're almost $30,000 per pupil per year in their public system, and the public system is hemorrhaging students. They're all leaving to go to the public charter schools and alternatives. Detroit, I think now it's up to 40% or so of the children that would be in a traditional public school are now in non-traditional public charter schools. So the crisis in education, in particular the crisis in urban education, it's not resource as much as it is will. And how do we get the community will? Where does that come from? Or the national will? Is this something that, I think Arnie Duncan, as the President's Secretary, and I'm pleased he's staying on, or he appears to be, has been quite outspoken, but is there something that President Obama, who maybe uniquely is, because of his own ethnicity and his ability maybe to speak to the communities where there's so much challenge, what can be done, or what would you advise as a strategy?
Well, there's a couple of things. I was just in my home city this weekend, New Orleans, and as we all know, New Orleans has gone through a tremendous crisis. Mm-hmm. And that city's changed forever. I mean, you can feel it in the people, you can feel it in the streets, you can feel it everywhere you turn in that city. That experience of Katrina has forever changed anyone that is still living there, or that lived through that, or has relatives that have lived through that. And so we had in New Orleans one of the worst public education systems. My father taught in that system for 30 years. And towards the end of his career in public education, he actually then went into politics. But he just said, the challenges that I am seeing are such that we've got to make some amends, we've got to make some changes. And what he was talking about in the inner city there, the numbers of students coming in that, in his opinion, were not capable of learning. Not because, they just didn't have the experience, or they were growing up in a very poor community, but because of some of the drugs that the mother had taken. And so, you know, his whole, you know, view of every student can do the same work if I just nurture them and teach them, it's just not going to happen, Desiree. And so we have to be realistic in terms of what are the issues for those students coming into the system and figuring out how we manage that differently. Because what he saw is large numbers of students being pulled down, waiting for, you know, X person to try to get it, and they weren't going to get it. You know, and he said the other thing is, you know, not everyone wants to go to Harvard, Desiree. Not everyone wants, you know, what about the community schools? You know, how do we get those community colleges up and running? And there's no shame in being a carpenter or a plumber or, you know, or any of those professions. You know, how do we get people, you know, employed and put in the right position and the right training, you know, without judgments of right or wrong? And, you know, I think that, you know, it's not about the money always, but it is, you know, about understanding what the issues are and being realistic. It's not about just passing that test. Well, I may have memorized that and passed that one, but do I really know, you know, how to think and how to get to the next level? Am I really understanding that for my own benefit, learning, education, paying attention to the work, you know, that's what's really going to get me ahead in life. We have a young guy that Amy Rule here, the mayor of Chicago's wife, is involved with a program, and she's got companies taking in, you know, interns, high school interns. So after school, you know, they come in and they work with us. And so, you know, you see this young man show up the first day, you know, not looking the way he should look, you know, pants all this way and that way, hair out to here. You know, now he's like, I don't know how he got it. Maybe somebody helped him. His pants are all together. He says good morning. His hair's cut. He's got a little vest on. I mean, you can tell. It may be the same vest every day, but he's learning this is what it takes to be successful, and you just see a difference in him. He's just much cheerier. He's, you know, he knows. Yeah. He knows. And so it's one person at a time. But it can't be just cookie cutter, we're going to throw money at this and it's going to go away. That, I think we've seen that doesn't work. And, you know, the other thing, you know, teachers, you know, we're in a position where we got unions or whatever. My father was part of the union. I'm not speaking out against the union. But there's got to be a give and take, you know, because what we have today is not working. So everyone has to have some give and take. And we don't have the nuclear family anymore. Yeah. And so that requires things to be done a little bit differently. You know, some kids are not getting any food at home. You know, so there's all of these issues that have to be taken into consideration. You know, but it's not the kids' fault.
I think I heard Detroit, I think, I may be having this wrong, but I think somebody told me that 6% of the kids in the Detroit public schools came from a two-parent family.
That's probably right.
I believe it, yeah. In our case, we have, in Illinois, about 23,000, a little over 23,000 employees. Most of those are in manufacturing. In the United States, when we were growing here until the last year or so, we were interviewing thousands of people for manufacturing jobs. And I was appalled to learn, these are for manufacturing jobs on a shop floor. So basic skills, nothing fancy. I was appalled to learn that we reject 60% of those applicants for a manufacturing job. Why is that? They can't read, they have no math skills, and they fail a drug test. So here's our society who spends $650 billion a year on trying to educate this mass of young people of talent that we have, and 60%, I'll make a poor calculation here, of $650 billion, we're throwing out the door because it didn't work and we can't employ these people in a basic skilled job. Garrett Patton is here, who is our distributor in the Chicago area, and he will tell you that his perennial problem is finding a certified technician to lay a wrench on a Caterpillar machine. Can't find them. The old days are gone. You don't lay a wrench on a tractor anymore, or an automobile, or a machine tool, or anything without what? Plugging your computer in first to see what happened to it. We have hundreds of jobs across the country in our distributors going open today.
And Doug, these are good paying jobs.
These are $70,000 jobs.
Yeah.
with a service truck, a very good position, family, upper middle class job. We have hundreds of them open at any given time. We're working with junior colleges, all kinds of programs to get people interested. Desiree's point. My stepdaughter, Diane's daughter, is a first grade school teacher, Chicago Public Schools, West Side. Very poor school, low poverty. It is it's not another society that she teaches and deals with, it's another civilization. It's another civilization. A PTA meeting that we used to know, and my dad and mom would go, and they'd come home and I was scared to death.
I remember that.
This is not funny. 2 parents will show up for her class of 25. And the first time she was a teacher here, she came home and she was talking about an experience she had where she reprimanded one of the kids. This was when she was a kindergartner first year, and took away the kid's lunch or his or her break food. And the principal jumped all over for doing that. She said, why? She said, because that's the only food that kid's going to get all day long. So this is a different world we live in, particularly urban public schools, that has to change, because we are losing generations of talent. When I go to China, I see a society that values education. They don't spend much money on it, but they value education. That's who we're competing against. They want our jobs. And we're frittering away 60% of $650 billion a year. Loose calculation, not correct. But you get my point on what we're not doing right. And this, to me, is a generational thing that those 4 people up here in 20 years are going to have a horrific situation to deal with in this country if we don't get a hold of it. Because then the party's over. We still have some party left, I suppose. But another generation or 2, this is over.
Yeah, because the demographic numbers get even worse. So you take that issue, and then you apply the change in demographics that's happening in this country over the next 30 years, which should be a concern to all of us.
Yep.
And you have a real issue. I think the theme you're hearing, if I can just jump in on the education thing, and I would completely concur if I'm summarizing it right, is what it starts with the parents. It starts with the environment the kid comes to the school from, and are they in a position to be prepared to do their work for the day? It's not about the money. There's enough money in the system, and like Doug, I'm all over the world. I don't care if it's whether I'm in Shanghai, or whether I'm in Singapore, or whether I'm in Sydney or Sao Paulo. There are societies that are putting education as a critical thing, and they're actually spending less money and making significant progress on it. The interesting thing about the United States, as I see it, is you got 2 contrasting views. You got the K through 12 view, then you got the upper level education, the university and college system, which ours remain, at least if not from my own view, the best in the world when you look at what we have for an aggregate of universities. So it's really interesting that at the very upper level, we clearly place a premium. But at the K through 12, we're spending the money that would indicate that we're putting a premium on it, but somehow we're not getting the job done. And your comment on the shop floor application rate, that's startling. That is absolutely startling. Yeah. I see it too, and I'm often asked by young people, what is something, when you go to speak at a university, what do you look for? What do you look for? And I think as an employer, the thing I look for most is intellectual curiosity. I'm less interested in your calculus score than I am how much intellectual curiosity do you actually have. Do you want to know why something works the way it does? And do you have that mindset? And I think that in speaking to young people, that's one thing we have to emphasize more, is have an intellectual curiosity. Pick something. It's almost less important what it is, but have the intellectual curiosity to really want to understand how whatever you're looking at works and how it fits into the society you live in.
There's some fabulous educational experiences happening in this country. Experimental, whether they're charter schools or different things. There's lots of smart people all over this and making headway. But the institutions that we have built up, not only the unions, but the management, all of the requirements we have on principals, on teachers, on doing all these other non-educational things inside of school have gotten in our way. But there's some wonderful things going on if we could just find a way to magnify that and use those around. We've all got examples, everybody has, but somehow it's the urban public school where the most talent is and the most population is that's just failing miserably.
I think the leadership of the country has sort of this ongoing obligation to explain the importance, and then the execution is going to happen at the local level, because I mean, you aren't going to run the schools from Washington. Not really going to run them from Springfield. You're going to have to, it is the mayor or it's the local leadership, but it will become increasingly a differentiator, I think. And your point, Doug, it will be a differentiator among nations. Just as I was making the point. I mean, one of the reasons immigration becomes important, you've got graduate schools, Tom, in some of these great universities that can't function without the foreign students there, because in some of these science and engineering curriculums, we literally aren't producing enough of our own, and we have to fill those slots in order to have the quality.
I hired a woman this summer, excuse me, it was last summer, that finished her, she was a Chinese national from Beijing, finished her MBA at Iowa with fabulous grades, interviewed incredibly well, speaks outstanding English, had those kind of financial analyst skills you really need to look at a strategic planning process. And because the economy, the job market was a little bit tough, and she didn't have the appropriate,
green card.
Green card. She was a free agent. The dean of the university called me and says, you should take a look at this woman. She's going to have to go back to China. She really wants to stay in North America. 10 minutes into it, she had a job. I mean, I didn't care what I was going to have to do. And she moved to Toronto for the job. And, you do look at that and you wonder if maybe when we give people the diploma that have come to this country, we ought not give them a 2-year green card to go with it.
The president's proposal yesterday would absolutely do that, and I think everybody's, this is probably the area that has the greatest consensus among policymakers on both sides of the aisle. I do think comprehensive immigration reform will get done this year, and I think actually sooner rather than later is my belief. There are a lot of other issues, but I think that one. We're at the point, we're about 10, 20 or so, and I need to open this up, and so I don't know if we've got some microphones, Lee, or how are we going to do that out there? Well, all right, I think I can summarize it. The private sector is not hiring enough, and the government's hiring too much, and how's that going to work out for us with all these people needing work? One of the things that, and I'd like maybe a quick comment on this, but it does seem to me the one thing that happened during that period of time is the role that technology has played. It's changed everything, and each of you have, I'm sure, experiences in the way in which that's impacted workforce. But at the same time, there's a lot of other work that now is maybe was once done. I think of logistics work, those great UPS, FedEx ads. That's all. Maybe once was a whole building in your corporation. Now that's some office outside in some other company. So
we used to have trading floors where people in goofy colored jackets stood around and shouted at each other to execute a trade. We've been all electronic for a long time in our market, and even the U.S. markets are now almost exclusively electronic. The issue is, as technology has come into any of our businesses, it's changed the dynamics. Doug made a really important point. You got to be able to operate that laptop or maybe an iPad. I don't know what they're using when they get to put the wrench in, but you got to be able to use that. And if you haven't accepted education as a lifelong experience, you are not going to be qualified for the changing world. That's one of the biggest changes I think that's happened in our lifetime, is that
that's not changing. We're going further.
No, it's going to accelerate. You have to
faster.
accept that the day you walk out of your university is not when things end. that's only the end of the beginning. You got to keep going with that lifelong learning experience.
There's no question that productivity has changed the need for labor. And the other thing that's kind of hidden behind that statement of the gentleman was, I think, globalization. And I'm proud to say in Caterpillar's case, we have grown employment in the U.S. and outside the U.S. We've added jobs in China for the China market. We brought, just last year, thousands of jobs into this country from overseas plants. And the only reason we can do that is because I think we're competitive, we are productive for those machines that we make here, and because we have external markets that we can penetrate. And if you look at the impact of globalization on the 7 billion people on the planet in the last 30 years, it's been remarkable and unprecedented. The average per capita wealth of the planet's population has never gone up so fast in such a short period of time. Now, unfortunately, that has put pressure on developed countries like Western Europe, Japan, and America. At the same time, and I would argue this, that we're taking on all this debt, doing all these things we shouldn't be doing, while we ought to be focusing on being competitive. And here we find ourselves today not being able to invest because we don't have the money. We've got a pension system that's upside down and a Medicare system that's upside down we've got to fix. Had we been aware of and working on those things the last 20 years, we'd probably have them in check. We probably wouldn't be talking about flat discretionary incomes in the United States for the last decade, and we'd have a different dialogue. But here we are, and again, it kind of gets back to what we focused on and what we haven't. So it's a really complicated world we live in. I happen to think an American public corporation is one of the most competitive vehicles on this planet. And let us go, and we'll add jobs. That's not all common thinking across the country at the moment. And our suppliers, many of whom are private companies, same thing. We can compete in the world. Let us go. But all the rest of this stuff gets in our way we've got to deal with that's off the subject. Okay. I'm sorry.
Governor, we want to make sure we get to people with questions. Right over here. Can you come before you? Here's the right here.
Somebody got to.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. You'll be next, okay?
All right, well, then we got one down there, too.
Now, we need to get you to a mic because this is being recorded by Chicago Amplified, so you could pick it up at a later time. So if you're not on the microphone, and please ask questions.
Desiree, you mentioned earlier that we should be trying to find maybe 1, 2, 3 issues as a country that we can focus behind. You know, something that I've been wondering, you guys all talked about having a little bit of natural gas background. Is energy independence something that we could focus on immediately that brings jobs back to the U.S., that helps our economy, that we can start then taking a look at other issues? But becoming energy independent, is that something that both parties can get behind, or are they too far apart on the environmental issues that it's going to prevent this from happening? I've just heard recently that, you know, we could be energy independent within 3 years. Do you guys think that's a possibility or not?
No, I mean, I think that is certainly, that could be a cornerstone, looking for those ideas, you know, that, you know, are job creation, that, you know, allow the country to be independent. Those are the kinds of things that, you know, other than the environmental, and where is it going to be, where are we going to drill, you know, all of those, how we're going to drill, you know, all of those pieces obviously, you know, would be debated. But, you know, I think I see movement in the direction of us making some progress there.
I mean, I see energy independence as a huge opportunity for us. Obviously, I'm supportive of the Keystone Pipeline being approved for obvious reasons. I mean, if you look at what that could do for this continent in terms of both job growth and accelerating the energy independence, I think of it as a no-brainer. I'm not insensitive to the environmental issues, but even the state of Nebraska, I think in the last couple of weeks, came out supportive of it. This is something that just should have been done a year ago. It should be done today, and if it's not done today, it should be done tomorrow. I mean, to me, that kind of thinking, that we're going to figure out how to make this continent energy self-sufficient, is a potential big dividend for growth from my perspective. All
of us in this room have been held hostage to a risk premium from from tough energy suppliers around the world who openly pollute their lands so we can burn their energy. Here we have a chance between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. to be energy independent in 5 to 10 years. Why wouldn't we develop that?
Yeah.
We're already seeing the chemical industry start to revive a bit. The plastics industry that left here because of high gas prices 10 years ago start to revive a little.
Fertilizer industry.
All kinds of things. So this is an opportunity we've got to take advantage of and free our children from the risk premium that we've all suffered from hostile energy suppliers the last 25 years. It's a no-brainer. I agree with you, Tom.
Yeah, and the geopolitical implications of what that does for, you know, both how we think about defense and national security. Huge. You know, they're real big and influence, frankly. There's all kinds of wins, and it's a great opportunity. And you've got the president's going to have an opportunity to be having a new energy secretary coming in, new head of EPA. So there's a way to signal kind of a let's kind of get moving along here. So let's go over there. We got a microphone and we got a question.
Hi. I think I speak for a majority of Americans when I say how incredibly frustrated I am with Washington, kind of regardless of where you are politically. Are there any things that you really recommend that we can do as individuals to try to affect change, particularly with the economy in the short term, rather than waiting until the next elections to exercise our votes?
I get this question often from our employees, what can they do? And I can go to Washington, Desiree can go, Tom can go, the governor can go, and we can get an audience with any senator or congressman we wish. And they see us coming, and they know our agenda, and they will or will not meet with us, or will not pay lip service to us. And what I tell our employees at Caterpillar is, you write a letter, you make it pointed, you write to your congressman and your senator. And every congressman and senator I meet with says, look, Doug, we're glad you're here, but we really want to hear from the voters. Caterpillar doesn't vote. And we've instituted at CAT a pretty cool thing where we can email our people on important issues, and we've done this over trade agreements. We did it over the budget situation in Illinois last year, where we inform our employees of by a website and a letter from me. It has a letter from them, personally signed, to their congressman. All they got to do is put their zip code in and it goes. And we have locked up congressmen's email systems for days with this, just simply from Caterpillar. And I hear all the time on that from legislators, don't do that again. But guess what?
But they get the message. They get the message.
But it's coming from individuals. It's not coming from CAT, because they did take the time to write a letter. And I try to talk about this all the time. State of Illinois is a prime example. You don't see an outpouring of protest in Illinois against what's going on. We're all just used to this, I guess. Why don't we do that and stand up? And it's no different with anything else. So that's my little piece of advice on that to our employees who ask that question a lot. Who we all feel like we're little things in this big wheel that's turning, but it does make a difference. It absolutely does make a difference.
Right, and I would, I think that is incredible advice, but at the same time, you've got groups that you are involved with, whether it's church or, a theater group or book club. Get them all together. Yeah. Get them all. I mean, because that really if I'm a senator, this is my community, but they're coming from all different places. Maybe I ought to pay attention to this. I can't link these people up under one umbrella of, that's Caterpillar. They really do have to pay attention to the constituents. They really do.
Talk about higher education, where we said that one of the strengths of America is higher education. One of the strengths of higher education is the choice that people have to choose among different kinds of schools, public, private, small, large. In the K-12 system, I would argue that one of the challenges we've had is that there's always been unlimited choice for people who are economically well off. I mean, you've had your choice. You could move and buy a house in a school district where you think it's a better school than another school. You could always put your child in a private school. But if you're poor, you're often stuck. There aren't any choices. You've got the neighborhood school and that's it. One of the things that's happened in places like New Orleans, it's happening in Detroit, and I know that the mayor is trying to do some things in Chicago where there's some additional choices. Because Desiree was making this point, there are different needs and wishes on the part of parents and students. You ought to create a wider array of choices and then let people choose. And I think if there's a charter school that's very high performing academically, that's fine. If there's one that's focused on the health professions as part of a hospital and training, that's fine. Let different approaches develop so we can get kids in places where they get excited and interested about learning, and let the parent have a choice. And I believe most parents want what is best for their child. Even, I mean, my experience as governor was in the most desperate of circumstances, I really didn't find parents who, you know, if they were able to express an opinion, they said, I want something better for my child. That was a universal truth, I thought. And so to give them choices, they would rather go to this school if everybody learns how to read than that school if nobody's learning to read. So.
Yeah, Jane, thank you for your question. Jane's a fellow Millikan alum who I've known for many years and haven't seen for a while. And I will tell you, and this is what we tell our daughter, that teaching is the most noble profession there is. And my answer to the question is pretty simple. I'm agnostic. We are pushing public schools, we are pushing charter schools, we're pushing every type of education we can in this country to get a better product. I don't care if it's unionized, I don't care if it's non-unionized, if it's charter or what. We need to do something different, and John's answer is right on. Let's go all choices, all ways we can go to get the best product we can get. Because there's somebody else in the world that's already doing it, that's going to turn out a better product than we are, and we are behind and we'll be behind. So we need help in all of these areas. We almost need a revolution in education in all of this. And it's not the public teaching model that we all grew up with. It's something very different today. We need the best of the best in all of the systems we can get our hands on.
And you cited the unions. I'll leave you with one observation. The most surprising thing about the charter school movement in Michigan, I had predicted that the unions, because they had a lot of advice about how to run schools, would cut out the very wasteful management and go directly into the operation of schools, with the teachers themselves being the school committee. That's never happened. And I would really encourage that. I think that the Federation or the Illinois Education Association ought to, because of their knowledge and their expertise, actually run some schools directly. And then they could show people what needs to be done to be successful. That would get them off the sidelines as organizations, because I think the nature of the education union is changing, and an education union in the future will find it impossible to represent both teachers and, say, janitors or bus drivers or other maintenance personnel, because if you think about it, those are costs of the education system, and the more you pay above market for the other things, the less money you have for the teachers and the actual education transactions. So I see a big coming crack up in education unions, the way they've structurally worked, because they're at war with themselves. The teacher no longer can support paying double for the maintenance worker above the market price.
In the back, you have a question in the back there? No, way over to the left.
As a young professional that is starting work at Caterpillar in June, the main concern for me in government is sustainability fiscally. How do you see businesses taking a proactive role in urging the government towards fiscal responsibility?
Well, great, and I'm glad you're at Caterpillar. It's a great informed question. I wish I had a great informed answer for it. What we try to do, and a number of us, led by John at BRT and CEOs and all of us, have just hammered away on this subject, on fiscal sustainability, fiscal responsibility. I think it's the number one, along with education and maybe a couple of others tied for number one, but a very important piece of our future. We can't be strong militarily if we're weak economically. We can't be strong as a society if we're weak economically. So it just has to be embraced. Luckily, we still have a little time to get a hold of it. Some fairly minor tweaks in pensions in the Social Security Day today. Some tweaks around Medicare will sustain this thing for a while as we work through it. But we can't even take the first little baby step on some of this. But we just have to keep an active voice, and we are active. And I know there's lots of business organizations, social organizations, private organizations hammering away on our legislators, and that's just what we have to keep doing. I'm not going to give up, for one, and I don't think anybody will, but it is frustrating year after year without seeing results.
Right. One of the things that we do with our publications, which actually are exposed to 72% of all African Americans 18 plus, is continue the dialogue and make certain that people are informed, make certain that they could be writing their congressman or legislator, and to keep that debate going and to keep it in the forefront of the magazines and on the websites, is to keep those issues out in front so that people are getting the information that they can make their own decisions about what types of actions they might want to take. And so not ignoring it, not punting, but really bringing those issues out to the public.
Yeah, I would join both of my other panelists in encouraging you to stay active. Your generation is armed with an incredible tool with electronic communication, whether it's the internet, whether it's tweeting, whether it's texting. If you think about what happened in the Arab Spring and how that was generated through a new form of telecommunication that a different generation embraced and knew how to get the message out. You're empowered in a way that 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when we all graduated, you're much younger than that, Desiree, but when Doug and I graduated, we weren't empowered with that. But you guys have that. Use that tool. That tool is incredibly valuable.
On the right over here, and then we'll go to the back after that question.
I think the whole panel has agreed we're losing a lot of jobs to the East, mostly China. I have a good friend, a professor from Kunming, who deciphered a couple of newspaper articles. Number one, there's a policy in China, 20 employees and under pays no taxes. So there's a lot of small corporations all over China which drove their economy upward. 20 and above, they pay. The other thing is, Chinese government is not worried at all about their military. We talk about sequestration. They're not concerned because the interest we're paying them on the securities they purchase from us, they claim in this article is funding their entire military. Are you aware of that, and how would that help us?
Well, the first part the first part about the small businesses is what?
They don't pay tax.
They have no taxes under 20.
Yeah, a company that employs 20 or few people pays no corporate tax.
Sounds like a good idea.
Does sound like a good idea.
One of the provisions that the president endorsed in the immigration reform, interestingly enough, is something that has a lot of support. Again, there's a lot of common ground, but one of them is that we ought to be more encouraging to entrepreneurs that want to come here and start businesses. The federal tax system is a challenge for business. A lot of smaller businesses just found themselves facing a tax increase because they're taxed at the individual rate. We have actually been talking at the roundtable, just at a staff level, with some of these organizations. What can we do? Because I would like to see. When I was governor of Michigan, we actually tried to get under a business tax we had at the time exemptions. By the time I left, you had to have $250,000 of business activity before you had any tax obligation. We kept trying to get that higher because you do want somebody who's got an idea to get started before the tax man shows up. And there is a lot of job creation potential in small businesses, and there's a lot of innovation coming from them. And today, again, with technology makes it so easy, kind of, if somebody with an idea to get started. I think we could be a lot more creative in what we try to do in this country. I think as far as your point on the defense budgets, all I would say is that we have a lot of reasons why we have to get our long-term deficit situation resolved. You just cited one. We can't. It's also a reason why the debt ceiling will have to go up when we reach debt ceilings. You've got to pay the interest on the obligations we've already incurred. I don't think should be a partisan difference on that view. The United States is not going to default. However, we would be well advised to bring that debt down as a percentage of GDP on as clear a course as we can possibly set as quickly as we can get it set.
Yeah, I'll just take a little more different approach on this, and that is the role of China in the world, the role of the United States in the world. China is a huge competitor to us. It's a huge market for us. It's our biggest creditor. And it's incumbent on the United States and the West to bring China into a world trading system that we all recognize, and China recognizes that. There are lots of unfair advantages in China, and we've got to absolutely hammer away at those as we find them as we go forward. But at the same time, if we're not careful, we'll see elsewhere in the world what's already happened in Africa. China today is buying up most of the minerals, supplying most of the construction, doing most of the architecture in the continent of Africa. Africa should belong to the United States. We ought to be able to do that as a country and put our people into Africa. China's getting it done every day. And they have virtually owned the construction business, all the hydroelectric projects, most of the minerals in the continent of Africa today. We're going to be competing with them for a long time. We've got to figure out how to do it. We've got strengths, they got strengths. We cannot be at each other's throats. They will surpass us at some point in the largest economy of the world. So the great institutions of the world, and I use great loosely, but the World Trade Organization, the IMF, all the things that we have in this world to deal with geopolitical and geoeconomic issues have to be brought to bear on China, just as we've done on Argentina, just as we've done on Greece and the rest of them. And that's incumbent on all of us, because we cannot, one, give up the Chinese market to our competitors everywhere else in the world, and two, I don't think we all want to be taken over by China down the world when they have all of our debt. So we've got to find a way to engage them positively, and it's tough. I've thought back about this. I imagine in Britain in 1900 and earlier thought, what's happening, 1800 I guess, what's happening with those Americans over there? And we beat them to the punch, and now they realize it. So we've got to find a way to engage with this country in a way that we grow the pie for both of us. And we can do that. 100 million, 200 million people a year joining a middle class. Isn't happening in the United States. Why can't we sell them all kinds of goods that our middle class enjoys? And we've got to look at it in a much broader way. It's tough. And labor, patent protection, all the things we read about are true every single day. And I know firsthand in the last 10 days, believe me, about China. More than I've had my eyes open more than anybody. Having said that, I'm not shying away, and we can't as a country shy away from the market, the opportunity, and the challenges. And that's kind of my political speech on that. But 20 or 30 years from now, China's got to be in the world trading system as a player like UK, like France, and like the United States.
Doug, would you, can I just ask you a question? Would you,
Sure.
Would you also say we can learn something from them once in a while too? We shouldn't be immune to, you know, maybe this 20 employee or under thing is a good policy. I don't know. You'd have to look at it, but we, as Americans, sometimes, you know, we've been leading the world in thought and in culture and in economics for a long time. This may not be what people want to hear, but once in a while we should listen and observe what else is going on in the world and bring it home, because there's some things that happen elsewhere in the world that we should actually be adopting. And we're culturally, we're not there, but we have to get there.
We make a hydraulic excavator in a dozen places in the world, 20-ton machine. It's a nice machine. We just opened a new plant in Victoria, Texas to make it. Our #1 plant in the world, and it's the same machine. Quality, safety of employees, recordable injury frequency, and almost every metric, our #1 plant in the world is in Suzhou, China. Competing with American plants, Belgian plants, Brazilian plants, Indonesian plants, and I can go on and on and on. Amazing.
We have 56 Chinese listed companies on our exchange, representing somewhere around $10 billion in market cap. I have 2 people in China that search for listings. And we know we're going to get burnt once in a while by a listing that doesn't have the corporate governance standards that we should have, and we apply the same corporate governance standards, but not everything in China is as it appears. But what I'm getting at is we get an inside look at some of the business plans, and there's some incredible things that are going to happen in China over the next 10 years. We have to position our country and our economy to sell goods, whether it's a Caterpillar truck, whether it's a media publication, whether it's an iPad. We have to position our companies better to sell goods to that emerging middle class. And by the way, I think the same thing of Latin America.
Yeah, and I think we have to understand from a regulatory perspective how we have to continue the development of the new technologies or not impair the development. If you look at the industries that China's going to develop, whether it's aviation or lots of different types of advanced manufacturing, if we can't keep moving ahead ourselves, to Doug's point, I mean, we're going to find ourselves competitively in a world of trouble. Yeah.
The Illinois Channel's coverage of legislative issues is underwritten in part by AARP Illinois.